All right.
So I hope my internet will be stable. I'm not so sure. I hope so.
All right. Do our best.
It happens sometimes. All right. You want me to start?
I think so.
I can understand you very good.
Okay. All right. So welcome everybody to episode 6 of TRINKtalks. Anything but Riesling is the theme that we'll be talking about this week. Welcome Philipp, welcome Andreas, and of course, welcome Valerie. Thank you so much to everybody for coming to join us. Before we begin, let me just say a couple of words about procedure. We've got all of our guests muted to avoid any sort of distractions or background noise as people come in or go out or have their home surroundings. When it comes time to the end, you can either put your questions into the chat box and we'll address them all at the end, or you can raise your hand at the end and we will try and go directly to you. I just want to say a big thank you to the team at Made in Genton for the help with the design of our logo and our upcoming website. I know that Valerie and I are going to be keeping them really busy over the next month as we get ready for our release, just as you guys are getting ready for the harvest. Yes, exactly. We're all looking to harvest something as time goes on. This episode of TRINKtalks is supported by Bottle Stops. With any luck, maybe Jerome is kicking around somewhere here. Bottle Stops is the specialist for wine tours in Germany. Bottle Stops organizes wine tours for interested individuals and also handles trip logistics for professionals and media. You can find out more at bottlestops.com. Just one more quick word about Trink. You've seen that you can get into this TRINKtalks through the website called trinkmag.com. Trink is German for drinks. It is also a new publication that Valerie and I are putting together coming in the early fall that aims at nothing less than changing the conversation about German-speaking wine, building bridges between the people making the wine, like you, and the people drinking them, like us, featuring reporting, original photography. We are trying to communicate the heart and the history of not only German wine, but also Austrian wine, the wines of Südtirol, and the wines of Switzerland, one wine region and one wine story at a time. If you'd like to know more, please make sure and drop your email into a chat, and we will put you on our mailing list to keep you updated as time goes on. My name is Paula Sidore. For those who don't know me, I'm sitting here in Bad Honnef, Germany, on the very northern edge of winemaking along the Rhine. I'm an American wine writer and translator, originally from New Hampshire, and I moved to Germany almost exactly 18 years ago now. When I started studying German wines, of course, I knew about Riesling, but what I was shocked to learn was the breadth and the depth of the other 99 white grape varieties that make up the panoply of German wine. It was, on the one hand, completely paralyzing and daunting because most of them I couldn't pronounce, at least when I started. Some would say I still can't pronounce them, but I'm working at it. But it was also thrilling. It was fantastic to find the common thread, what you say in German, the rote Faden, that connected all of these different varieties and yet still had something uniquely German about them. And that thread is what I think Valerie would agree that we've spent the last 6 weeks trying to find and what we are trying to explore in the magazine as well. So to that, I will hand it over to you, Valerie.
Thank you. My name is Valerie Kathawala, and I am a New York-based American wine writer focused on the wines of Germany, Austria, Südtirol, and German-speaking Switzerland. So the German-speaking wines that Paula was referencing. And I'm just going to jump right in here today and start in on our topic because it's a big one. As a winemaking nation, about 65% of Germany's 100,000 hectares of vineyards are dedicated to, as Paul said, 100 different white wine varieties, which is a number that really surprised me. And they range from ancient historical oddities to international superstars we all know. Riesling constitutes less than a quarter of them, actually. Rheinhessen and the Pfalz, from which our guests hail today, are home to the widest range of varieties, and that's why it's particular pleasure and an honor as well to have Andreas, Durst, and Philipp Wittmann join us today. Today we'll be drilling down on Silvaner, Weißburgunder, Chardonnay, and Scheurebe, the varieties that our two guests are pushing in fascinating directions through old vine plantings in peripheral terroirs, biodynamic farming, and edgy as well as traditional cellar work. So Philipp, maybe would you start and just give us a brief introduction about yourself and help us understand how you, as a world benchmark Riesling producer, have come to be working with Silvaner, Weißburgunder, and Co.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's easy. It's our tradition to work with these different varieties. And so in the old times in Rheinhessen, Silvaner was the main variety for the whole region. Of course, it's changed in the way that Riesling is dominating the game more and more. There are also a lot of other varieties which have their home part here or which are traditionally grown here, like all the Burgundy varieties. And there is a reason for it's the climate conditions. We do have the chance to produce these different wines because it's possible. It's the climate conditions are quite good also for Burgundy varieties and some other specialties, but no question. As you know, more than 75% of my production is Riesling. So no wonder the first sentence I will say today is that for me, Riesling is the greatest and the best variety we could work with because it's so unique and it's showing our terroirs in the very best way. So it's really the king of the varieties for my home region and for whole Germany. But of course, there are some other very, very interesting varieties, and there is a lot of development, and also climate change is bringing us in some new situations. So you are right, and it's true that we should have an eye on these other things. So especially when we do talk about the different Burgundy varieties, we get more and more chances to produce this in a very serious way. With Silvaner, which is the most traditional variety, it's getting more and more challenged, but there are also new solutions in the way of winemaking. And so maybe this will be one of the interesting tools which will Andreas give us tonight about working with Silvaner with traditional ideas and new thinking.
Excellent, thank you. And Andreas, you came to winemaking through a back door. What was that path, and how do the varieties you work with reflect that sort of angled approach in?
Yes, backdoor is the right name because it was just I'm a photographer, and so in the late or in 2003, I started to change into wine photography and get a lot of very interesting sites, mostly in Europe, to wine. And in 2008, settled down at the Palatine in Pfalz. Very near to Philipp Wittmann. It's just Philipp, it's 20. I was so interested in spontaneous fermentation, so took some grapes and pressed them by hand and fermented them inside my bureau. You can hear me?
Sort of.
Is it stable?
Not so much.
Valerie?
Difficult.
You can hear me?
It's difficult to
Not
hear
so
you.
much.
I can see you.
Oh, it's a problem with the internet, maybe.
Could be.
Or maybe it's not.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Did we lose him?
Do you want? We'll
South
see.
country.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. All right, well, we'll come back to Andreas when.
Yeah,
Oh, there
maybe.
he is. Okay.
Oh, that looks better.
All right, Andreas, we're ready to hear from you.
Yeah. Okay. So where was okay. So don't get my.
I think we're gonna have to find another solution. Do you want to try to
Don't
just
get me.
on
Haven't seen-
well, maybe while we're waiting for Andreas to sort out his technical side, we can go back to you, Philip, with a couple of more questions. So, Philip, you alluded to the fact that Silvaner has a long history in Rheinhessen, and I believe it was at one point the most planted variety. And why was that? What happened over the century? What changed that caused it to be less dominant and Riesling to take its place? And yeah, maybe you can start there.
Yeah, I think that of course also in the old times people has recognized that Riesling is a more interesting variety, and the reason why Silvaner was grown was more because the variety has not these intense necessaries for the place where it's grown than Riesling has, and through this it was it was much more grown than Riesling, because for Riesling you need special vineyards. But of course there have been special places where Riesling has always been grown. For example, all the part of the Rhine, direct Rhine Valley, like the red slopes on Nierstein, Nackenheim, or in Oppenheim, Riesling was always dominating the game. Also here in my hometown Westhofen and in the neighbor village, Riesling was dominating, but Silvaner was also very important. What we do feel nowadays is that we have to be careful with Silvaner in a way. Through climate change. We do see that the acidity of Silvaner is getting down more and more because of the higher ripeness, and alcohol levels are getting higher. So you have to pay attention enormously to keep Silvaner in a crisp and elegant style. And this is one of the most reasons why you do not find so many high-end solutions for Silvaner in the region nowadays.
Okay, interesting. And Andreas?
Maybe it's all, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's all, yeah. May I speak?
You're on. You're on.
Maybe it's also because of its reputation and acceptance with the Silvaner. I think it's much easier to sell other varieties than Silvaner, because Silvaner is seen as something old-fashioned in Germany, and we don't have this reputation for this grape. Always when I try to get people into this, say, "Oh, Silvaner is boring."
Really?
Yeah, he's right. It's getting more and more difficult to bring people to this old-fashioned variety. But mostly, when you are on this point, there is a chance for a revival. And in a very small way, it just has started, exactly with wines like Andreas is doing.
Do you think that is starting to change somewhat, where people are getting more and more interested in the idea of authenticity and indigenous grapes? Obviously, Silvaner fits into that scheme a little more than some of the Burgundy varieties. Do you see any sort of growing interest in Silvaner over the last five 5 or so years, or is it still declining?
Andreas, you.
Yeah. Philipp?
You, please.
I would say that people are getting more open to different grapes, and they are getting more open to different styles of wines. And this is something that I like very much. I think it has something to do with more interest in general to wine and more open-minded people, because customers change. When I was a young guy, then old people drank wine, and this has changed fundamentally outside the wine regions, where all the people drink wine, of course. But outside these wine regions, younger people get into wine, and so they're much more open, of course, to all. There's more acceptance, and so I think there's a chance. We can see the same with Sauvignon Blanc. Yeah, Sauvignon Blanc was a very, very huge movement we had, beginning maybe 10 years before, and then it was for a time the thing to drink. And nobody was into Sauvignon Blanc before in Germany.
And Andreas, you got cut off earlier, but you were starting to say your backdoor into wine and how that might have influenced your choice of the grapes that you work with. And I'd be particularly interested to know how that, how you intersected with Silvaner in the Pfalz, which I don't think of as synonymous.
Yeah, I got to say I'm really a Silvaner fan since I'm drinking wine. I like this wine region Franconia, where Silvaner is the main grape, and I've always been very, very surprised how good this grape matches when it is a wine to food. And in my opinion, wine and food pairing is fundamental for winemaking. In Germany, we don't have this direct connection. I think if you have other countries like especially Italy or France, Spain, origin wine countries, their people drink wine with food. When I was in Italy some years before, they told me for older people, it's a sin to drink wine only by itself. And so when I discovered for myself Silvaner in Franconia, it was very clear for me very, very fast. This is a great grape to do wines you can drink with the food, because it's not so expressive with the fruit. It's a little bit dark, maybe you could say it's a little bit of soil, and it doesn't dominate so much the table.
Okay.
And so when I started doing this wine thing, it was just an experimental thing. It's still experimental. It's such a tiny production. It's less than 1 hectare. I tried to discover which are the grapes that are grown originally here at the point where you are. I'm located in the northern Pfalz. It's direct to the frontier to Rheinhessen. And I read those old books, and they were signed. We had 2/3
2/3.
2/3 part of Silvaner and 1/3 part of Portugieser. That's it. So this was in the 50s. So maybe 1-2% of other grapes. And so I was very interested in old wines. And I discovered, okay, the oldest things you can get here are these original grapes, Silvaner, and it was very nice for me as a Silvaner fan, and this Portugieser. It's an autochtone grape. I think it's not not known outside of Germany, and so I was very glad to get those grapes from old wines, and so it was very good for me to start with it.
Okay. You actually lead straight into my next question to both of you. Very nicely done. Which is, and you alluded to this before, that there's only about 20 kilometers or 15 kilometers separating your two estates, right? And yet you've got two regions. You've got the Westhofen region of Rheinhessen, which has really sort of become a bit of a hotspot for making some of Germany's best dry wines. And then you've got the Pfalz, and your area of the Pfalz is not as well known, even though there's not that much difference between the two. And the focus is also pretty different on the varieties. Why do you both think that is?
I personally think that you could, if you talk about the geological situation and the climate conditions, you could start in Kallstadt, which is southern of Andreas' place of Bockenheim, and go to Westhofen and to the next village Dittelsheim, and you do get a very chalky limestone driven rocky underground, which is quite similar. So it's not that the regions are very difficult. They're very different. It's chalky soil. It's a heavy clay topsoil. Of course, there are a few differences in some sites, but in general, from Kallstadt to Westhofen, Dittelsheim, the main part of the top vineyards have the same underground. Climate conditions are not so different too. Maybe the guys in Pfalz are 1-2 days earlier than us in budburst, flowering, and also the harvest. But it's very, very much comparable. And it's almost a little bit the question which people have started going into these freaky scene of quality. And of course, we have these famous wine village like Kallstadt, which is close to Bockenheim. And we do have other more famous villages around us here. So but not every village between in this line is well known, but it doesn't mean that the conditions are very different.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
And Andreas, just shifting to a different grape here, and one that you've sort of made something of a signature of, Chardonnay. Very few people outside the country seem to realize that Germany's really having a Chardonnay revolution, and a whole new generation of producers is focused on it, from Franconia to the Pfalz. Why German Chardonnay, and why now?
Because it's such a great grape, and we know those, I can't spell it, fucking good wines from Burgundy. And so I think Philipp mentioned we have this geological situation of limestone, and we got also the same exposition in my region to the east, mainly in the vineyards. And so I was very interested to try out. Yeah, do we got a chance to do a great Burgundy style Chardonnay here? And I think the main thing is to get some old wines, not to plant new. And we have Chardonnay, I think, since nearby 30 years now in Germany. So you if you got the luck to get a good vineyard, it's possible to do a type of Burgundy wine, with this Chardonnay grape. And nowadays practices are open. Yeah, we can see what other winemakers do in other regions. It's a big change of talking together. You can see in the cellars. It was, of course, a gift for me to be, as a photographer, to have this possibility to view all those things, to view the vineyards, view all those different cellars, see what is similar, what is different, how much technique you know or non-technique, and so I just tried it out.
Is part of the growing interest in Chardonnay to do with the fact that plantings from 30 years ago are now finally at a stage of maturity where they're making interesting wines?
I didn't understand, please.
Are the Chardonnay grapes is part of the reason that Chardonnay is more interesting now, that the vines have finally reached an age, a maturity that they didn't have before. So now finally we get do we have old vine plantings of Chardonnay in Germany, or these are all since the past 30 years?
It's possible. I think maybe you know it better, Philipp. I think it's possible since '86 officially, and so there's really few Chardonnay that is planted now. I think it's 1.5% or something like that of all grapes. But the part is growing and growing very much, because all Burgundy grapes are growing very fast in Germany. People like to drink Weißburgunder, Grauburgunder, Pinot Gris. It's a big movement of Grauburgunder at the time, but they also like to drink Chardonnay. I think it's these three grapes are much more comfortable for my main customers. I got to say it like this.
Okay. Can you say, is there something particularly Pfalzian about the Chardonnay that you grow, or is it more with your personal stamp? Like, do you feel that Chardonnay can convey the terroir of Bockenheim in a way that, for instance, Silvaner can, or is it more a canvas for you to play with in your cellar, for instance?
Hard to say. I have it in my mind. It was just a question: do we have the right soil? Yes, we got. Yeah, we got the right possibilities of don't get too ripe grapes, but we get it right every year. It's not a problem for us. We are not so far from Burgundy, and maybe we're a little bit cooler than they are, so we can take the grapes a little bit later. It was for my mind, it was a perfect match, yeah, for this grape, and so I like to try it out because I like Burgundy, of course.
And can I just
ask
one more follow up? What are you doing in the cellar with Chardonnay? How are you vinifying it?
Oh, it's very simple. Take the grapes, maceration for a little time, press it, do the whole bunch into barrique, and that's it.
Okay.
Fermenting, spontaneous fermenting in the barrel with all this, with everything. There's no dividing. Took it all into the barrique, let it ferment, still lays on the yeast for 1.5 or 2 years, and then take it out in a steel tank, let it sediment for time, and then with a little sulfur, or no, not with a little sulfur. When I do Chardonnay, I use more sulfur than in any other wines, because I like this Burgundy style, reductive style, And so there I need some sulfur to do it. Me for myself.
And how about the Angel Durst? Andreas also makes a wine that is a blend of Chardonnay and Riesling. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
There's no blend.
No. Okay. All right. We'll move on to the next question. Go ahead, Paula.
The question is directed at Philipp in terms of Weißburgunder, which is something that you had mentioned before, Chardonnay's cousin, if you will. In 1970, there were less than 1% of all of the vineyards in Germany were planted with Weißburgunder. Today, they constitute nearly 6% of the plantings. With so many other varieties available, what do you think explains this growth, and why is it important for you? I mean, obviously, you've got 350 vintages in your family to choose from. What is it about Pinot Blanc that you think speaks of Westhofen, speaks of Rheinhessen, and speaks of Wittmann?
I personally think that the Pinot Blanc is the best adapted Burgundy white wine variety on German climate conditions. It's the variety which is getting the most elegant texture, which is working also in cooler climate conditions. For example, you could also enjoy nowadays the Pinot Blancs from the Mosel Valley, which is quite new, but there are some extremely good examples. So this shows that Pinot Blanc is very well adapted on more Nordic climate conditions. Also one of the reasons why it's also tradition in Alsace, for example. It's for me to get expression of the terroir into the wine, to get the texture of the vineyard in the glass. Pinot Blanc is working much better on our conditions than all the other varieties in the Burgundy family. So no question, the Pinot Gris is getting just intense, and Chardonnay is quite complicated. I agree in Andreas' explanations about Chardonnay, and I'm a big lover of Burgundy, especially on the white ones. So because I do like this chalky texture in the aftertaste, I'm really looking for the saltiness when I drink wine, and so therefore no wonder I'm in love with Puligny, with Meursault, and all these amazing places. I do feel that also there is something similar from our dry Rieslings from the chalky soils to this part of Burgundy. But I could say from my own experience that it's much more difficult to produce a great Chardonnay in Rheinhessen than to produce a great Pinot Blanc in Rheinhessen. And I personally would say it's because of the climate conditions, and because of the situation that we all do have the perfectness of King Chardonnay in our head when we drink a glass of it. And so this makes it extra special and difficult to agree in another style. And if you go with a variety to another region, you have to agree that it's not the same as in these other appellation. And so if you produce Chardonnay in Germany, it's not Burgundy. And I do love these modern style of German Chardonnays. I personally could say I also like to drink them, but I'm also a critic of these reductive impregnations which are given by sulfur intensely just to get these reduction of a nice Puligny, because this is just winemaking. This is not terroir. This is not the appellation. And so it's interesting to see the development of all the Burgundy whites in Germany. And I personally think that we do get maybe also in long term big advantage, because we get the ripeness, but we do still get enough freshness and a good acidity, a ripe acidity. So I personally believe very much in the quality of white Burgundy varieties in Germany in long terms. but for me now, the top Chardonnays in Germany are more grown in Baden and maybe a part of the Pfalz, but not far northern, because it's a climate discussion, and Chardonnay is getting very exotic in cool climate conditions. And this exotic texture is something difficult if you would like to have a crisp and lighter style, because then you have to pick earlier, and then you do get the aromatics of green asparagus, for example, which is awful for a wine. And and if you do have a modern winemaker who is following the ideas of the modern Burgundian wines, then you do get green asparagus together with reduction. And so I could say congratulations, that is not what we are looking for. And it's, you know, I believe in terroir, I believe in the place where the fruits are coming from. And therefore I love Pinot Blanc, because with Pinot Blanc, it's easier also for people who just would like to produce a good wine.
So Pinot Blanc has less expectations or ideas that people are coming to and comparing it, and they're willing to accept it for what it is and develop an identity that's unique to Westhofen without running into these older comparisons that won't work with the climate and the soil. That makes complete sense. What about Grau? Well, I will ask about Grauburgunder in a minute, but I actually have a couple of questions about Scheurebe. Terry Thies, in his book Reading Between the Wines, said, if Riesling expresses all that is noble and good, Scheu offers all that is dirty and fun. Yet within Germany, Scheurebe really struggles to be taken seriously. In a number of places. It's considered low quality or over-sweetened, or it's always sort of pushed to the side, at least in what I've seen. I think it's a fantastic grape. And I think yours is one of the best examples that I've run across. Yours is dry, it's serious, it's cellarable. I did a tasting years ago where we had one of your older Scheus, and it was fantastic to see how it developed. What do you think, what do you see in Scheurebe as worth pursuing? What do you see as the potential future of Scheurebe?
So this is one of the little niches we do have. It's a amazing variety without a need that it's grown on more hectares than now, but with the need that it's surviving. And for these niche wines, it's necessary that there are some people who are nerds for this variety. And I agree in every way of expression for this variety. There are amazing examples in the sweet and noble sweet style, and there are amazing examples for the dry style. For me personally, it's important also with the Scheurebe to get the expression of the vineyard into the wine. And then I do love these more intense aromatic fruit flavors in combination with chalkiness, with crispness, with salty finish. This is for me the goal when I produce a Scheurebe wine, and this is also the reason why I produce it in the dry style, because you could feel it much more than in a sweeter style, that you feel the vineyard. And so, yeah, Terry Thies was a good customer for sweet Scheurebe in our estate in the old days. And when I have taken over the estate, he's visiting us and asked me for bringing more sweetness into my Scheurebe. And then I have not agreed, and from this day on, we have never been very good friends. So, typical story, however. So, but you know, I'm the one who has to decide how our expression should be, and my personal wish is to find the expression of the vineyards in the bottle, and I try to work hard for this year by year. And it's not always a need that the wine is perfect. that everything is pointed out on the perfect place, because it's nature and you do have different vintages. I love the expression of the vintage in the wine, and I agree that a wine is different year by year. This is our tradition in the Nordic hemisphere, that we do have these differences. And so it's something unique. It's something which living and timeline wine to change over the time. And this is the goal. And for this idea, Scheurebe is a fantastic variety, but it should never be something where you do have a main focus on.
Okay. Can I just ask you, have you played around with a bit of maceration with Scheurebe?
For sure, for sure.
How does that translate?
It's interesting. And nowadays, I just produce one Scheurebe a year. It's a estate Scheurebe dry, so one of our basic wines in a way. And I'm nowadays more back on longer maturation times on the skins than a few years ago, because I do feel that these secondary aromatics are more intense, and I do like this. But it's always a dance, because if you have too much phenolics in it, you do lose elegance. And I also love the straight texture. It's a game.
Okay.
Let's see. So here's something. There's Riesling has long been the face of German wine. Everybody understands that. But as climate change continues to transform the traditional identity of Riesling, which is this interplay between sweetness and acidity, sort of very filigreed style, which varieties do you both see as having the greatest potential, and why? Andreas, you want to start?
Chardonnay. I think so. Oh, I think so. If you mention Riesling, we can see in the Riesling very exactly this climate change thing, because nowadays it's possible to do a very dry, very ripe Riesling, and it wasn't in the ancient years. So it was quite hard. It's a late ripe variety, and now coming from the south, we get more and more problems to be. Philipp said it was told to Silvaner to get the acidity, to get the freshness in Riesling, and for example, that's in Palantina. I've mentioned the Sauvignon Blanc. A lot of winemakers are looking for a grape beyond Riesling, because they know at the middle heart, when you know Deidesheim, Forst, Wachenheim, they get really a problem not to get into the situation to harvest the Riesling too early. So they are looking for something that is not so where it's easier to do the wine. Riesling, coming from the south, gets really a problem with this climate change. We have the situation at the Mosel Valley where they made those beautiful light Rieslings, and nowadays they got also with Riesling the situation that the ripeness is coming higher and higher. So we need, of course, because there is climate change, alternatives to Riesling. And for me, Chardonnay is one.
What do you feel represents, to come back to what Philipp was saying before, what represents a German Chardonnay? What is unique about that Germany can do, not as an imitation of Burgundy, not as an imitation of California? What makes a German Chardonnay?
Just kidding.
I would say that there is, we are at the beginning to develop this. When Philipp told about those very green, very high sulfur Chardonnays, you say it's a new German Chardonnay style. I agree. I don't like it too much if you just want to have this rocket style. I think we have a good we can learn from other countries, especially from Burgundy. But Chardonnay is not only possible in Burgundy. We have beautiful Burgundy, of course, from Northern America. We have beautiful Chardonnay also from Australia, from Italy. So why don't learn from others what is possible? Of course, we got our situation, we got our soils, we got our vineyards. But for me, it's not a shame to see what others do.
Okay.
And find your own expression at your own village, at your own region. It's not a shame.
Okay. So learning from the masters and then using that to develop your own identity. Good. Thank you. Philipp, you have holdings in 4 VDP classified vineyards for your Grand Crus. All are for Riesling. Do you see classified vineyards for Silvaner, for Pinot Blanc in the future in Rheinhessen? I know you said Scheurebe, not so much. Scheurebe should be what it is and have fun with that. So do you see that as a future in Rheinhessen with some of these other varieties, and what would need to happen?
So I would first would like to say some words to Andreas' explanations about alternatives to the Riesling. I personally do not believe that I do not see the situation that we need alternatives for the story of German wine at the moment. I agree that there is climate change and it's a dramatic thing, but I also could say at the moment, for us in Germany, situation is getting better than 20, 30 years ago. Of course, it could mean that in 30 years, we will really struggle, because if it's going far in this direction, it could mean that it's getting more and more difficult. But this would also mean that all our world of wine will be struggling in a very special way. I see a lot of possibilities for Riesling still. So for example, my village Westhofen do have vineyards situated from an altitude of 90 meters up to 280 meters. And in the old days, there was no chance to bring Riesling in a ripe position higher than 240 meters altitude. Nowadays, it's great to have some vineyards on the top of the hillsides for use it for plantings, for the basic qualities, but it's never would have chance to be a great wine because it's still a little bit of unripeness also in the warm years. So we are not talking about the situation that Riesling is getting overripe on every site we do have. And when I do see the Mosel Valley, we do see the situation that the Mosel growers have nowadays a chance to produce great dry versions of Riesling and great light styles of Riesling. So they could do both at the moment. I know there will be development also in future, and we will see what it means. And I know, and we have to find solutions for a lot of things in the world, but it doesn't mean that our Riesling story is struggling. It's the opposite. Our Riesling story is getting great again because we have never produced these dramatic, great qualities row by row than we have done it in the last 10 years in every region. And so I still believe that this should be our story. And I also agree that in little structures, it's definitely great to play with other things. It's important to check out what's possible. And I do agree if individual estates are doing individual things. And I also agree in the idea that Chardonnay is growing all around the world in great quality. And of course, it's necessary for us in Germany to learn from them. Also, all good. But our story will be also in future the Riesling story. And all the other varieties will stay behind this in long terms. That's my promise. So finish this, and now to your question. I've forgotten, unfortunately.
Philip, if I can just jump in, because I think that's a very interesting point. I'm just wondering, I hear this same position, yours, that Riesling is the long-term story for Germany from many growers, particularly biodynamic growers, because they are in touch with their vineyards in a way that allows them to anticipate and respond to the needs of their vines, so that I don't think you taste climate change in the wines as much. Do you feel that that's, I mean, I know you've been organic since a very long time and biodynamic for longer than most, and you practice it at a very serious level. Do you feel that that is part of the long-term strategy for yourself?
For sure. It's important to find the right growing balance of the plants in new climate conditions. And this is one of the most important things. And it means more handwork in the vineyard. It means more thinking about the soil, more intense view on the growing ways of the plants, and for sure everything you could do for getting a better balance in the vineyard will help to bring quality into the fruits, especially when climate is changing. So no question. And we do see that more and more growers, a lot of them are not certified as an organic or biodynamic grower, but they also have an intense view on this. So growing balance in the vineyard, this is the most important thing. And we all have to learn, and we all have to have an intense view on these things in long terms. And you do see the development, for example, in Burgundy, where nowadays more than 50% of the top growers are biodynamic because it's a need for them. It's necessary. And so we are on this trail that all the quality interested people have had to have a view on these things, and it will go on for sure, no question.
Okay, and Andreas, just before we jump back to Philip's question, what's your view on that? What is your view on, I'm not entirely sure of your farming practices and how you feel that they impact your ability to combat climate change and to grow these particular white varieties that you have been speaking about.
First, I got to agree Philip that we got to have a much more precise look to the vineyard. Yeah, as you mentioned, handwork is getting for high quality wines is more and more interesting. I would say not only handwork, technique all in all is going more important. We have to care nowadays very much to sunburn, for example. It's another expression of this climate change. So at Friday, Saturday, we had so high altitude of temperatures and so much VU from the sun. So nearby, any vineyards have little damages because of that. So you have to keep very clear how there's the management of leaves, not to get burned, those grapes. I would just one step back, Philip. When I talk about the climate change in Riesling, I mean it's coming from the south. So, for example, in Baden,
what do you mean?
It's typical to do those Burgundy grapes, Spätburgunder, Weißburgunder, etc. But of course, my view was what's for the next generations. You mentioned this 30 years thing, and that's where I was focused on. So I think 30 is one generation, and we have to keep clear to get higher into higher regions to do the top Riesling thing. You are absolutely right with the Mosel. They now have the possibility to make both. They are really winners of this climate change, but also they are looking for other great varieties to have a chance, an opportunity for the next generation. Wine making is in most situations a family thing, where you give your knowledge from one generation to the next. It's not in my family, but in most situations.
Good. Do we want to come back real quick to the classified vineyards question? Because I do think it's interesting.
I remember.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First, I would like to come back to. At the moment, I feel definitely happy with our decision that it's Riesling and Pinot Noir. I could imagine that Pinot Blanc would have the chance to express the vineyards in a straight and good way, to name it on the label. If it's a need to bring it on a quality level as a Premier or Grand Cru, that's a different question. So if you see where we are coming from the German wine law and the quality classification decision officially, now to the VDP classification, which is a private classification, but luckily used also from a lot of other growers and learned nowadays, and giving us a new profile for German wine for the top qualities. And now we see that maybe we'll also get an official German wine law, which is following these ideas. So we are on a good way, that it's getting more and more clear. So it's you have to do things step by step. Mm-hmm. At the moment, I see that it would be good to say that only our highest qualities, our noblest varieties, are allowed to use these predicate of Grand Cru or Premier Cru level.
Okay. What about you, Andreas? Do you see a potential for Silvaner in your area? Do you see any area where you think that Silvaner could have classified vineyards? Is there any place that you feel has earned it, or any variety that you feel has earned that?
It's a tragedy in my region, because it's really hard to find new Silvaner plants. For winemakers, it's not an option. We have in the Pfalz, in Palatine, we have now. It's not a big deal. People are not looking for Silvaner. For Silvaner, Silvaner is located for most Germans in Franconia. Even Rheinhessen, which was a big area for Silvaner, they have not. There's not this Rheinhessen Silvaner. It's not matching anymore. And I would say, to combine it with my region, this Silvaner thing, it's hard to get. And for me, I'm not so focused on this classification thing, because I do simple wine like land wine. We say there's no classification, and so it's not the question for me.
I know, that's why I asked it.
I'm very glad to those efforts that we get a new wine law by focusing on another thing than Auslese, Halbtrocken, and all those things. I'm very glad to get it a little bit more simple and clear.
Well, I think you've both given us an excellent introduction to just this tiny but very important handful of grapes that very few outside Germany really associate with German producers. And I hope, as one of our viewers asked about exports of Silvaner to the US, and that people are always looking for something new, I hope that people will recognize that there's a huge world of discovery to be made with varieties aside from Riesling. And if you have some sort of prejudice against Riesling, that you'll reconsider in the form of some of these really beautiful and extremely terroir expressive wines. Since we've gone a little bit over time, I think we won't be able to field any additional questions, but please, if anybody wants to just send a quick direct message or chat, then we'll be able to answer those afterwards. So thank you both very much to Andreas and to Philipp for joining us late tonight and shedding some light here.
This has been fantastic. Thank you, really, both of you. Normally, this is the point when I talk a little bit about what we're going to have up for our next week. We don't have that. We started the series with 6 myths, saying 6 myths about German wine and the winemakers who are breaking them. We've delved into everything from all German wine is sweet, to all German wine is white, to all German wine is Riesling. And we've tried really hard to open people's minds through the people, you all, who are doing it. So we're going to take a bit of a break for the summer, like I mentioned before, while we put together the launch. And then we're going to be back in the fall and resuming the series again. So if you're interested, if you weren't able to participate tonight or you have someone who wasn't able to participate tonight, this will be up in about a day or so on our YouTube channel. Feel free to subscribe, look in, and leave any comments in the email section. And once again, thank you so much to both of you and to everybody who participated. Thanks for coming out, for staying with us. And we look forward to seeing you all on the screen or in person, hopefully very soon. All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. Great show.
Thank you.